It's time now for World Watchers International with Mae Brussell, who for over 17 years has investigated and exposed political conspiracies worldwide. World Watchers International originates at KLRB, Carmel, California. Here's Mae.
Good evening. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California, December the 28th, 1980, and this is broadcast number 473. I don't remember a time in the last 10 years that compared to the feeling that I'm having as this last Sunday broadcast on the end of 1980 is taking place, and we go into 1981 with the specter of Ronald Reagan and the CIA cabinet, vice president, and officials of the government from the intelligence community moving into the White House. The only thing I could compare my feeling to at this time is the despair I felt 10 years ago, and I'll go into some more of the John Lennon murder, but I want to tie in the situation 10 years ago because it's been a continuous pattern of America sliding downhill in the last 10 years. In 1970, I didn't feel like sending Christmas cards to my friends. I wasn't feeling jolly, and things were looking pretty bad in the world. So I decided to get out a small newspaper, about 12 pages, 14 pages, a little sheet, and send 1,000 copies to every member of Congress and to presidents of universities and the major news media and the various researchers. And in that paper, I had a column called Years of Sorrow and Despair. January 1970, 10 years ago, Richard Nixon was in the White House with John Mitchell, Spiro Agnew's vice president, and Robert Haldeman and John Ehrlichman and that gang around him. The Vietnam War was going strong. It was a year after Altamont and the killing up there and the Give Me Shelter movie and the Charles Manson family, the counterintelligence operation, blaming the hippies and the musicians for the violence that was going to come down. It was the January after the Chappaquiddick affair, which knocked Ted Kennedy out of any possibility in the White House race in 1972. It was 1.5 years before Daniel Ellsberg published the Pentagon Papers, and 1.5 years before my first radio program on KLRB. I felt miserable. John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X had all been murdered. So had Adlai Stevenson and Dag Hammarskjöld and Patrice Lumumba and all other people around them who were working on peace missions. So I wrote a column to various sections of our society in this New Year's greeting that I sent out. First column was called Facts and Evidence of the Conspiracy That Killed John Kennedy and How It Would Haunt Our American Political System Until That Murder Was Solved. The next was a column on the age of specialization, going into private researchers like myself spending these years into a matter such as the Kennedy assassination because the Justice Department and the law enforcement agencies refused to do it. The third column was a New Year greeting to Richard Nixon, saying that his future was linked to the truth of the John Kennedy assassination and that his future was shaky if he didn't come up and investigate more behind the murder and what he was doing in Dallas the night before and the morning that John Kennedy was murdered. Another column was called Coup d'etat for the Elite Bureaucrat, and I referred to the book by Edward Lutwak that I mentioned a few weeks ago on KLRB, and I talked about the palace revolution that took place in the United States and the coup d'etat in Dallas that changed hands and government, and referred to the think tank at George Washington University that is now behind Ronald Reagan. Another column was a blast at Lyndon Johnson and his appointed Warren Commission, and in there I mentioned Leon Jaworski, who went on to cover up the Korea Gate and the Senate Watergate hearings, and John J. McCloy, a member of the Warren Commission who set up the Seven Sisters Oil Combine that has raised our oil prices tremendously. He was official with the Chase Manhattan Bank. And I talked about the CIA and the assassination of John Kennedy and the Nazis that were protected by the Warren Commission, who were a major part of the assassination plans to kill the President of the United States. At a column, What Next? Senator Edward Kennedy, accusing him of false liberalism and obstructing justice and truth. Another one, What for Congress in 1970, referring to their impotence and their inability to move one way or the other. Another column on Is There a Democratic Party, on the sellout of the Democratic Party, making this a one-party system. Nobody speaking up for the poor, for housing, employment, civil rights, and so forth. As of 1970, it would be downhill all the way with both parties looking alike. There was a column, Greeting to the News Media, regarding their major lies on all of the murders and the assassinations, and printing remarks about from Spiro Agnew, attacking the youth in this country who were trying to point out some of the problems with the Pentagon in our society, and Agnew was putting them down. There was a column called Best Wishes to All Blacks. In 1970, You Will Need It. And it warned about the increase of the Klan and the Nazis in this country. And from 1970 on down, their civil rights movement would be curtailed. And they would not have that mobility up the economic and social ladder they thought they would have. Another column, Good Luck to the Jews, Why Don't You Wake Up? And it had to do with articles of Drew Pearson on Nazis holding power in the United States, and many quotations of the increase of Nazis in the United States. Then there was a section called Good Luck Hippies, You Will Need It, and it had to do with the use of LSD and mind control and the breaking of the youth anti-war movement, which so successfully was wrapped up with the murder of John Lennon, to put the whole era in a package and bury it, or hopefully bury it once and for all. And then there was another column on the peace organizations and demonstrations for peace, and the role the Pentagon was taking against the protesters. And it's true, they were all photographed and put into data banks and identified for future use. Then I had a section called Couples to Watch. One was Governor Claude Kirk of Florida and his contacts with Ronald Reagan, their policies to break the University of California, and their links to Nazis and the Wackenhut Corporation. One on Pope Paul VI, who was Montini, the Secretary of the Vatican, who had written passports for Nazis to go to South America and Shanghai and all over the world, with H.L. Hunt. The couple of Svetlana Stalin and Marina Oswald, both working with the CIA to get their American citizenship, and the links of Spiro Agnew with the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover. And then concluding that news sheet that I had written, on the back, I had headlines from 1969, December, just at the end of the year, called Years of Sorrow and Despair. You read those headlines 10 years ago, and they don't sound much different than today. There was an Associated Press story, Jury Finds Incredible Misdeeds in High Places. Another story by Tom Wicker in the New York Times, Justice on Trial. Another New York Times article, Klan Leader Vows New White Supremacy Drive. The New York Times, James Reston, Who Will Investigate the Investigators on Political and Military Life and the Wrongdoing of the Pentagon. Another story, The Pentagon Accused of Tricking the Public. This is the Washington Post, December 1969. Another story by Roscoe and Jeffrey Drummond, December 1969, in the Washington Post, While the Nation Burns, Congress Fiddles. Another headline, Violence Cited as Internal Threat to America. This was December 15th, 1969. And then a Washington AP story, A Worried Look at the U.S. Image. World attitude towards the United States at the lowest point in 50 years. People abroad judge us on the basis of what we do rather than what we say. The most devastating impact came from the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King this year. Yale President Brewster had a headline, Increased manipulation of society by the power blocks is linked to student unrest. And he talks about the students at Yale being put down by the power as they want to express their feelings about society and the war at that time. And finally, there was a headline story, Quotations of C.P. Snow. This was in the New York Times, November 16th, 1969, titled, A Very Sad Situation. The Sage Finds the World. C.P. Snow said, "I have been nearer to despair this year in 1968 than ever in my life. Everything that has happened in public has pointed in the direction of anti-hope. In 1967, one could feel it in the air. This year, one can see it. If I make you depressed, forgive me, because it's the facts that are depressing you, not me. For a brief period, one can even put a date on it, from 1962 to 1965, there seemed a realistic chance. Now it has become remote. Everything that has happened in this dark year has pushed it further away. We are all selfish. Political memory lasts about a week. Political foresight stretches about another week ahead. To stint ourselves to avoid disaster in 20 years, what body of people would ever do it?" Signed by C.P. Snow. And that is the way I closed my brief news sheet that I sent out, as I say, 1,000 copies. And that was my contribution to my country and my feelings at the end, or the beginning, rather, of 1970. The reason I read it tonight, for several reasons, is that same kind of despair that I feel ushering in the new year is present, only it's 10 years later. And I see the young people in terrible state of shock about John Lennon being murdered. And we talked 3 weeks ago about who would kill John Lennon, the motives for killing him, and the doubles and the machinery that sets in motion this type of assassination. And last week I gave you clues of the smoking gun in Georgia, Lebanon, Arkansas, Tennessee, Hawaii, Switzerland, his trips around the world, his high finances, and his training, with possible training in DeKalb County with the very people who killed John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. And I said this week I would talk about what can we do about it. But I noticed that, as C.P. Snow said, political memory lasts 1 week. Political foresight stretches another week ahead. Now, he asked the question, who would ever spend any time in anticipation of disaster 20 years ago? There are some researchers, like myself, who have worked for 17 years to avoid the things that we're going into now. The fact that our methods didn't work is because not enough people participated or believed that the time invested would be useful. And when you ask me, and what can I do about the John Lennon murder, the assassination, I have to ask you the question, how much time are you willing to invest? Are you willing to put the 1 week into it? The syndrome of the Wailing Wall. The Jews used to have the great Wailing Wall syndrome. They'd stand against the wall and beat their heads and knuckles and cry. And it was only when they turned around and looked their adversaries in the face, because it was either then or the ovens again, that they were able to build any kind of a country or a weapon system for defense, or a system to go in and take hostages that have been taken from them, airplane kidnappings and so forth. Israel built an army, for better or for worse, and it probably is the best in the world today, when they stopped crying and reappraised what it takes to survive in this world, to meet your adversaries eyeball to eyeball. I have ideas of what we can do, or what you can do, and I'll share some of them with you, but how many of you really would spend 8 or 10 years or 12 years on a project to find the truth? I'm dealing with a bunch of older people who've done research for many years, who are getting tired and depressed and have carried this burden a long time. And then the next jump is the pablum generation, the easy food, the quick, open the jar and stuff their mouth, instant television with 7-minute intervals of commercials and solutions to problems within the half hour, the situation comedies, and the competition of all the various Farrah Fawcett's and the Bo Dereks. How can this generation concentrate enough? Will you be able to, and are you willing to? If you ask, what can we do about the murder of John Lennon, I have to ask the question, how much time are you willing to invest into the project? How much hurt do you feel that being ripped off of 30 or 40 musicians? If 5 of them were murdered as a cold-blooded plan, that's bad enough, as I've said before. If 20 of them were murdered, or 40 of them, heaven help us, because that many politicians and lawyers and witnesses to trials are being murdered simultaneously. And is this generation smart enough to be consistent, to not drop out of the battle? I really don't know. You ask me, what can you do? And I have to ask you these questions. Can you stay with it long enough? Can you give up a television movie? Could you give up a party if there was a meeting to discuss these things? Somebody in town has offered a space to have discussions on what to do and to form groups. I've never worked with a body of people before for several reasons. One, the ratio of agents that infiltrate us is 1 agent for every 5 people. There are people that break up the meetings. You have to argue on divergent opinions. The decisions aren't made to the people who did all the research, but others come to argue with you, and the groups break up. I saw it many, many times in New York at the Elgin Theater, at colleges where I lectured, and small groups that wanted to come to solutions about assassinations. We had provocateurs. We had them in the GI Coffee House out in Seaside during the anti-war movement. We had them when we were fighting the Cambodian bombings or the Kent State meetings when we were opposing those. Every discussion group was infiltrated or broken up with people who wanted divergent attitudes projected into the room to break the discussion, and nobody went away satisfied, and the groups broke up. Would you be psychologically secure enough to do research or to have discussion groups and have people in who agree with you, and drop those people that don't have the same feelings as you? When you get into this kind of research, you not only invest your time, you have to be tough-skinned. You have to ferret out people that you think are negative. You have to take the opinion of people that you formerly liked who tell you you're crazy. You have to be willing to slough off relatives, former friends, and all kinds of people to really get to the basic facts of survival and how to find out who is doing these murders. You have to invest time in reading and thinking, and you have to be secure in your own self. You can't take the opinions of other people or their definition of you or a diagnosis of your mental state as anything but their opinion. And most people aren't that secure. They want me to tell them how to do research and how to become politically active, but they're not secure enough in their own selves to have people over and discuss these things, or to not see any more people that don't want to discuss these things. I know myself that when I started working on the John Kennedy assassination, I had friends that I thought were liberal. I thought they were intelligent. I realized that they actually had Nazi mentalities and were very conservative and didn't really want to make changes in society or know who killed John Kennedy and later Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King. They only acted liberal on the surface, but when it was down to the push and shove, they wouldn't write to a public official, and they had every excuse there was in the books. They came out with kind of excuses. Well, you know, it really wouldn't be a conspiracy because too many people would be behind it. I'm sure the Justice Department and the Police Department will look into it. You know, we can't fight City Hall. We'll never learn the truth of these matters. Why couldn't a loner have killed John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King or John Lennon? Don't you think that there are crazies out there? Let the organizations do it for me. I'll send money to Philip Agee or the NAACP and let them find out who killed Martin Luther King. These are some of the arguments that intelligent people use as an excuse for their not having to invest time. They say, I don't have time to investigate the murders. There's too much to read. I'm all alone. I don't know anybody who shares my feelings. They're not willing to throw off those friends and family and take on people who agree to search further, but they prefer to be alone among a lot of people who don't want to know what's going on. Other people say, and rightfully so, that investigations brings surveillance and bugging and wiretapping and probably investigation by the IRS. That part is true. There are dangers in asking snoopy questions, but there's also danger in not asking snoopy questions, because what wasn't asked 10 years ago didn't solve the problems. The headlines from 1969 sound just like and 1970 sound like 1980. Only they're even worse, because now we're economically in a depression. We have inflation. The home prices are out of reach. There's rampant unemployment. The whole series of peace people have been knocked out. The musicians have been killed off. Things are worse now. The hostages have been held in Iran, and this country is at a stalemate. Uranium and atomic weapons have been dispersed to many countries: Israel, Pakistan, South Africa, Argentina. Because those headlines were not taken seriously in 1970, we have worse headlines in 1980. My feeling has always been that if there's a danger in surveillance and wiretapping, and my phone is tapped and my mail is opened, it's going to be worse later. What they're going into now is electronic mail, where you send a letter and they transcribe it and deliver it in the next city. And you don't have the privacy of your own mail. They don't want to return your own check stubs to you. They want to keep them for you and know where your money goes and who it goes to. So there are problems, but you have to ask yourself, how much do you want to put into discussion groups or meetings to really come to solutions of these problems? I know that if television had been invented before the czars were kicked out in Russia, the czars would still be in power today. And if the United States government, RCA, and General Electric had sent electricity and television to Vietnam prior to getting into the war in Southeast Asia, the North and South Vietnamese would belong to the United States, and we wouldn't have had to spend any more money than television sets. We could have given them I Love Lucy, All in the Family, and various situation comedies, and kept them pacified. Now, this generation has its television, its TV guides, and its, as I say, it's instant solutions and a choice for everybody. If you don't want 96 this year, you'll get 69 next year. It doesn't matter what they call it. They're tantalizing you with situations and stories that are diverting you from the really quiet thought it takes with other people to solve these crimes that I have done along with other people and other researchers. I know that by the Christmas cards I get and the messages I get, that I have reached a lot of people in the past years. But I didn't just reach it because I thrashed around in a temper tantrum and said, I want to find out who killed John Kennedy. I sat many lonely hours for 8 years just cross-filing the Warren Commission hearings before I realized the network and the framework of such political assassinations. And that 8-year investment in that study taught me how to approach things like the murder of John Lennon and the other assassinations that followed after John Kennedy was killed. How many hours a week would you be willing to invest in your future for the next 10 years or 20 years that C.P. Snow wrote about? There's 24 hours in a day times 7. I figure is 168 hours you start out with. And all you need is 7 hours sleep, which is 49 hours, which leaves you 119 hours. If you work 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, that would be 56 hours, and you're left with 63 hours. And you can do thinking when you're driving, going to and from work. I even keep a tablet on the seat of the car. I listen to talk shows and have a pencil. Now, if I wait in line at the bank, I have a paperback book. Or if I wait at the cashier stand at the grocery store, I pull out a book and read a little bit, such as Reinhard Galen's books on espionage and the master spy. And if you spend 10 hours a week shopping and repairing, going to the shoe repair or the TV shop to get parts or a tube or whatever you have to do, 10 hours of shopping a week, and you can't do much more with inflation or you'll be broke, that's still 53 hours left. And in those 53 hours, would you spend 5 hours a week reading a book, writing to a public person, writing to the news media, to Barbara Walters, Walter Cronkite, Phil Donahue, and your congressmen, your senators, and telling them what you know about these murders? Would you write to them and say, I want to investigate these program zombies. I want to do away with that insanity plea of the white-collar crime when public officials are killed, such as the Dan White, or in this case, John Lennon murder. I want to find the hospitals and doctors who treat these people. I'm talking about Dennis Sweeney, who killed Alan Lowenstein, and the Charles Manson episodes in prison or in hospitals, or the mind control of Sirhan and the visits and the people they associated with, or this Mark David Chapman and David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. I could do a litany of mind-controlled zombies. Why don't we put these on a computer and see the names of the doctors who treat the same people, like David Berkowitz and now this Chapman fellow who killed John Lennon? What about the IRS? Shouldn't they investigate the finances of the mothers, the brothers, the wives who supply the money, the modus operandi that stay in the background, who aren't seen? Chapman's mother disappeared from Hawaii the day that John Lennon was killed. She'd given her son the money for the trip along with his wife. She works for Sears Roebuck. She hasn't been seen since. She helped buy his art collection worth thousands of dollars. Would you write and ask to locate the missing evidence? The logbook that Chapman allegedly signed in Hawaii is missing. The album with his fingerprints that John Lennon allegedly signed is missing. Who had the coat thrown over their face the time John Lennon was killed? Why is the physical evidence missing? Would it all fit together, or did they have a patsy they were going to pull in and supply a false motive? Again, going back to the doubles, where does all this missing evidence go to? And also, let's publish the passports of these people, such as the SLA, Emily and William Harris and Angela Atwood, and various people in these conspiracies. What countries do they go to? Sirhan, Lee Harvey Oswald, we know he's down in Mexico, and over in Europe with the Soviet Union and the Navy intelligence. But this Chapman fellow trips around the world, London, Switzerland. Where else did they go? What were their tax records? How much did they have, making $4 an hour and living in a very expensive apartment with expensive art collections and so forth? Find the money, find the travels, find the hospitals and the doctors, and you pretty well can put together how these people are moved like robots by the intelligence community. But are you willing to spend 53 hours of the week out of that leisure time, whatever else you do with those hours? Can you spend 3 or 4 hours a week? 1 hour listening to KLRB, 1 hour writing for a insert with the references, the sources of information, a discussion group, maybe an hour and a half a week where you talk about these matters and decide who will write to which public officials, or call talk shows, radio talk shows, and send letters to the editor. There are some very conservative people in town here that once every 30 days they send a letter to the editor. You see their names. That's how often you can write in. Maybe we should have a concerted letter writing campaign where each one of us writes once a month with our views. I haven't sent many letters to the editor because I felt that my work on KLRB reached enough people, but there's some people that don't listen to KLRB who do read the newspaper, and maybe we should plan ways to act or move to get this information out. There are all kinds of excuses for not doing research, and as I say, I've listed them, but there are all kinds of reasons why this information should be disseminated. We can't hope too much on the young people. They're in college, they're out dating, they're worrying about whether he loves her, whether she loves him, where they're going to get a job, where they're going to go to school. The important thing about accumulating this information is that you can throw it to public officials and expect them to move, and if they don't, keep a record of your letters and later trace their activities and accuse them of covering this up. Letters should go to the Justice Department, to the New York Police Department, and if you're interested, I have a list of addresses where you can write and save your letters, and we can try to force people to become aware through letters and calls, use this information, and be aware that these zombie robots are created for specific murders, and that the murders could be solved once and for all when we get angry enough to demand that they be solved. This is the end of the first 30 minutes. I'm going to take a 1-minute break and come back with you with some more ideas on the John Lennon and other murders.
This concludes the first half of World Watchers International with Mae Brussell. We will return with the second half after a brief pause.
Okay, this is part 2, and the summary or the conclusion on the John Lennon series. I'll be updating a lot of facts on the murder of John Lennon. There isn't much coming out now, but there's enough to do many broadcasts on that, and I'll be updating those in the weeks to come. But again, the question of what are we going to do about the sum total of the murder of politicians and musicians specifically. Just leave aside the others, judges, lawyers, and so forth. Walt Whitman once wrote, there is an oracle current in the world that nations die by suicide. The sign of it is the decay of thought. Now, I can't really believe that this country is on that route. I believe there's a lot of people fighting back. If you write to me, I'll give you the address of a place to order information or books specifically on the assassinations and on the interlocking links, the Nazi connections, the multinational connections, the mind control books that are available now. Mind control is one of the most important subjects and has always been of interest to me since 1967 at least, the role of the government in mind control. When murders take place, such as John Lennon's or other political assassinations, Aled Lowenstein, or the shooting, Jack Ruby using his gun and shooting Lee Harvey Oswald, or George Wallace shooting, and so forth, there's an immediate scream for gun control. And gun control is very controversial. And right away, people want to take the guns off the streets or out of the homes. And this is the way the liberal, the so-called liberal, reacts. Let's get the guns. Let's have gun control. As soon as John Lennon was killed, there were people from the station here at KLRB and from the local community who met in a bar in town and had a party, and the money was to go to a lobby to fight gun control. Well, the gun control issue isn't as important as mind control. If people would use that money to force the congressman to write letters to force them in the Justice Department to expose the mind control programs at UCLA, at Boston Hospital, at Vacaville, and all over this country, and Hawaii, as I mentioned last week, and these mind control centers, our energy really should be used to study mind control, because through weapons, you get these assassinations, but the assassinations are covered up because the assassin has been programmed both to kill and to kill himself. One of the best examples is that book, The Control of Candy Jones, which is still available. And she tells how the CIA trained her to kill, how not to kill, but to kill herself. They wanted her to commit suicide, and her husband saved her from that. But they trained her to hate blacks and hate Jews and Italians because they smell. I've referred to this many times on my radio tapes. The CIA, with our tax dollars, trains people who have no hatred to hate. So they can train you to hate John Lennon or train you to become a racist. And under torture, which she went under, she didn't break her mind control. And she can pick up a telephone and get instructions and pick up a phone and be told to go to Paradise Island and jump into this shallow coral reef and kill herself. Luckily, as I say, her husband began to deprogram her, and she didn't die, and she wrote a book about it. But this is a time bomb, because as long as we have robots who are trained killers, nobody is safe. There will always be guns, because private security guards such as Thane Caesar, are personal security guards sent out by Lockheed, and he was the man who fired behind Robert Kennedy's head, at 1 inch from the head, and got 3 fatal bullets into Robert Kennedy. The security guard system has increased about 200%, I read in a New York newspaper that somebody sent me, since John Lennon was killed, and Ringo has a security guard, and Elton John in London has a guard, and people are very nervous and have hired guards. Well, security guards have been part of the conspiracy. The Secret Service didn't protect John Kennedy. They didn't look in the windows or the buildings, and they made all the major errors of some oil people and far right-wing people meeting and deciding the route instead of the Secret Service deciding the route. So the murders are never going to stop by taking guns away, because the security guards who protect these people know when they go in and out of buildings and when they come home. And if they're sitting in a car and the person that they want dead is in, whether they're making a record or doing a concert and so forth, the security guard can be part of the conspiracy. I don't know where the guards were at the Dakota when John Lennon got off. Somebody saw this man in this military stance, but nobody speaks up to say who it was who saw him empty these bullets into John Lennon. They said he stood out there for 3 days, but why didn't anybody call to protect John Lennon? He owns various apartments in that building, and if a man was seen lurching around for 3 days, the security guard at the Dakota would be the one to call. And he, of course, is armed, but I'm sure he's armed. But the point is, security guards aren't the people you trust, and they have the weapons. Even this Chapman, Mark David Chapman, was a security guard in Hawaii, and he took lessons in Georgia on how to shoot and how to be a security guard. So guns aren't the problem. Gun control isn't the answer. Mind control is the problem. Even in Jonestown, there are approximately over 100 people who were involved in the murder of 909 people in Jonestown. And before the House Foreign Relations Committee, there was testimony that they were trained assassins. And nobody has asked where these assassins are, where they went to, what countries they went to, or identified them by name so we could be on the alert for them. So that many killers are out, and being as Jonestown had all the drugs for mind control and all the weapons and narcotics and millions of dollars that they needed, these people are still heavily financed and will be useful in killing someday. Now to the subject of what we can do if you're really interested. Several years ago, I changed the name of this program from Dialogue Conspiracy to World Watchers. It used to be Dialogue Conspiracy, as many of you know. I've been a Weight Watcher on and off for years. I lose weight, and then I put it back on, and then I lose it, and I go to the meetings. And all of a sudden, I realized the way that Weight Watchers operated when Jean Nadic started it. She was overweight and went to a New York hospital and got a diet. And she found it was easier to use their diet and have 10 people in her living room than to do it alone. So they would get together and decide what food was legal. They'd watch their fat fall off, go off, or if they stayed the same, they helped each other and gave support. But each one of the women in the group who lost 20 or 30 pounds and had learned how to weigh the food and how to measure it to take care of her own health and safety, then became the leader for another group. And several years ago, she sold the franchise for $26 million. And I thought of all the work that I'd put in the research for so many years. It's been how many years since John Kennedy was murdered, and out of those years, maybe 6 people had ever contributed in terms of books, filing cabinets, and money for copying machine, and very few people have ever put anything back into the research for me or for other researchers for printing material and so forth, or postage stamps, or long-distance telephone calls, and all the expenses incurred. We put money out, but we don't, there's no money coming in. So I got the idea that maybe we should be world watchers, that we should have discussion groups, and maybe I should take 10 people and discuss with them the situation, the books to read, suggested people to write to, have a meeting. Weight Watchers is $5 a week to go to a meeting to watch your own fat go away. Maybe the price of a tape cassette, or if you live in town here, you can tape it yourself, and it wouldn't cost you anything. And bring the tape to the meeting and invest an hour and a half a week. That's what they do. And they sit and talk about whether it's summer squash or banana squash or half a banana versus a whole banana. And for their own welfare and to take control of their own lives, they get together to discuss what is healthy for them. So I thought maybe someday, as a world watcher, if I took 10 people that wanted to invest the time and energy, I would discuss with them and have meetings, just as Jean did with the other women that came to her, about what is going on in the world, the sources of information. And then when those 10 people have gone, say, 16 weeks and understand the process behind the assassinations, the way they're covered up and so forth, they could become leaders and get 10 more people in their group. And that would, within a short time, you would have 100 people writing to congressmen, writing to the news media, calling attention to new evidence, writing to the Justice Department, the police departments, and so forth. In other words, we'd write to Tom Brokaw or Jane Pauley and tell these people, or Jack Anderson, why are you covering this? Why are you lying? Why don't you investigate this? Here is this lead. And we would tell them, just based upon information that we receive through the normal channels of the news media, what we expect, instead of them telling us what they want us to know. One of the scary things that was in the news last week was an article by Cronkite. It's about Mr. Cronkite, that he's going to have instant history lessons. It's an article by Fred Hessinger from the New York Times. Instant history lessons by Cronkite, his exciting plan. And he tells how when certain events come down, they can reach for a computer or a compressed obituary of a person, or if the Soviet troops go into Afghanistan, you get an instant history of Afghanistan. Now, this is called the Satellite Education Services, put up by the Rockefeller and the Sloan Foundations. They've underwritten the production of pilot programs, and they're beginning for the Los Angeles Public Broadcasting Station. Now, this is scary because these programs will go into Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Boston, and Washington, and they're going to blanket the school system with instant education. They'll tell you that Lee Harvey Oswald shot John Kennedy when there was no physical proof that he even held a gun, no fingerprints, no witnesses. They'll say James Earl Ray killed Martin Luther King. James Earl Ray came out with an article in the Tennessee newspaper this week that Ben Jones published in his newsletter on the links of the assassins of Martin Luther King to narcotics traffic and organized crime. I talked about that last week. Those same connections you'll find were behind the John Lennon murder. And Ray names these people, and these people he names are directly linked to Reverend Hargis and the Christian Crusade and the people that hated John Lennon for his Jesus remarks and hate rock music. So the instant history lessons that the Rockefeller and Sloan Foundations are going to put out will negate what the researchers are doing. It will deny the truth about who killed Robert Kennedy. They'll say that Sirhan did it and leave out Thane Caesar. And if a country is invaded, they'll give a reason that is not true, such as the history of World War II, when Hitler said that the Polish were causing the confrontations, and actually it came out that Hitler had Germans dressed as Poles that created the excuse in 1939 for Hitler to invade Poland, or the Gulf of Tonkin incident that Lyndon Johnson used to escalate the Vietnam War when it actually was the radar on our machines. Cronkite has been trusted by the American people. He is a pathological liar who tells you 1/10 of the truth or 1/100th of it. So at a time when the Rockefeller and Sloan Foundations and the school systems want to use Cronkite's capsules, it's more important than ever that we hold on to our truths and fight for them and know them, and that involves study. If I invested 17 years to protect the next 20 years, some of you are going to have to make that same investment, and maybe It takes the time of the meetings. As I say, maybe we should meet an hour and a half a week. I'll give up the time if you are willing. I, as I say, know of a place that's been offered to us. But, of course, again, you have to screen out those people that are sincere. This may be a ruthless thing to do when you're on the air. You're open to all kinds of people coming in that may want to come. We need people that are solid in the community, that have been here a long time, people that have followed various exposés and been activists at one time, or people who are established. They have to have a phone number or an address, not an unlisted number, and they can't take off for trips back and forth to different countries and cities with no noticeable means of support. They can't be divisive. I never went to a Weight Watchers meeting and argued that I could drink whole milk when they said skim milk. There were certain restrictions on losing weight, and there's certain restrictions on gaining information. And anybody who would be divisive, if we get a group together, is disinvited, right? That they can't come back. We don't have the time or energy to handle divisiveness. I can turn you on to information. The newspapers have listed address, and for those of you who get the tapes, I'll include them in this week's flyer of the press relations offices in New York of ABC or NBC News or the CBS television or public broadcasting service, or the address of the House Subcommittee on Communications or the Senate Subcommittee on Communications. And our local newspapers have the addresses of our Congressman Leon Panetta or Senator Alan Cranston or Senator Hayakawa. The addresses of public officials are always available. All you have to do is go to a who's who in the library, and I buy them at used book sales. Almost every well-known person is listed there. And what we have to do is flood them with letters and information and express our outrage. And sometime, maybe public officials will have shared our feelings but not have known which way to turn. People like Leonard Bernstein, who spoke up on the anniversary of Kennedy's death this year at the publishing party and reminded people of that terrible tragedy and how it was covered up. I am willing to meet with some of you to start a group if you want it. I have not done it before. I found that the anti-war movements were very dispersed. The WILF, the groups on the peninsula were too divided and not active enough. They settled for too little and they disbanded too fast. When they thought the war was over, they broke up. I never did think that the war was over and continued constantly at doing my research. You can write to me at Box 22511, Carmel 93922, if you are interested in having a discussion group. Don't write to the station because I only come here once a week on Sunday nights. But I do have a P.O. box, and if you can't remember that, you can write to my home and give your name and your telephone number. And if you're interested in discussion groups, I will get back to you. Information is power, but our ability to disseminate information is going to decrease when Ronald Reagan is in office. There's a new book out called How Western Culture Dominates the World by Anthony Smith, put out in London by Oxford Press. It's describing the pressure on the third world countries who depend upon the Associated Press, United Press, Reuters, and other news media in France, and that the satellites are taking over all the information so that they're going to be squeezed out of the information flow. And where the third world felt that they had some chance after the 60s or during the 60s to break colonialism, they feel more desperate now than ever. And also, this book describes the use of communications to control major companies, the mail of major companies, of radio and television stations, to control the news, to analyze weather, to size up harvests or troop movements or mineral deposits. And this book describes something that I've known for a long time, that satellites can tell mineral deposits, undiscovered mineral deposits in countries that the very government is unaware of its existence. You can see it through the satellites. then the United States engineers a coup and puts into office those people that will guarantee are getting the uranium or the bauxite or whatever it is. The satellite tells us, because we have the technology, where schools of fish are, where oil reserves are, where minerals are, and the third world is left out of it, and the messages can be disseminated to the major corporations, the IBM company and others, and leave those other people out of the communication network. This is a book on the geopolitics of information. When computers take over, the important thing is that they're run by people, and that people have to hold on and fight for their history. They can't let go of it, and therefore it's more important now to learn the facts of the way the government was taken over in 1963, to learn the facts of who killed John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy or John Lennon. And there is no way to do this except by meeting together and talking. There are no plays or television or movies, the diversionary kind of movies. Some movies are very good, like The Tin Drum, and I saw some good movies this year, but the diversionary fun things ought to be put aside if you really realize the crisis in your freedoms that's going to be coming down in a short while. One of my favorite sections of the Bible is in Ecclesiastes, the seasons and the time for every purpose. But somehow or other, what was written then is perverted or turned around. People don't allow us the luxury of the time that is appropriate to behave in certain ways. Our instant communications, our instant satellite, whether it's the television or entertainment industry, our instant news that solves murders within 12 hours, deprives us of the right to know how to function. I have the headlines of when John Lennon was killed. He was killed at 11 o'clock on the 8th of December, and the morning newspaper on the 9th had solved it. One headline says, ex-mental patient killed John Lennon. Another one says, a wacko, lone wacko killed John Lennon. Another one says, a man with a mental problem who identified who wanted to be John Lennon but tried suicide. By killing Lennon, he killed the Lennon in himself. These instant solutions within 12 hours, when most of the world was asleep and most of these newsmen didn't wake up till morning, they had to be writing their stories in their sleep. They deprive us of the right to figure things out. In Ecclesiastes, the way this particular section goes, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the sun, a time to be born and a time to die. Too many of these public officials are dying too young. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. We don't have time to pluck up what is planted. It is trampled on. The visions or the dreams or the hope of getting along together, the anti-war period, the kids in San Francisco, the digger movement, they weren't allowed the luxury. Drugs were thrown in, they were poisoned, their minds were blown, they weren't allowed to see the fruit of their effort of getting together. A time to kill and a time to heal. We don't have time to heal anymore. Before one killing is over, another killing takes place. Whammo. If it isn't Jonestown, it's John Lennon, and before that it's Pope John Paul I, and there was the Nelson Rockefeller murder. There's a series of deaths, John Paisley, problems to solve, done by the same people. We don't even have time to heal before the other murders come. A time to break down and a time to build up. We're denied the right to build. We can't save money to live on. We can't plan for the future. We're afraid of 1984, the electronic boss. Reagan's going to step up the CIA. How can you build? And Ecclesiastes says a time to weep and a time to laugh. If you laugh today, it's going to be, as Dylan said, a hard rain's going to fall. There's not much time to laugh because every time you feel gay, you have to weep. And a time to mourn and a time to dance. After John Lennon was killed, Yoko said, I see him smiling up in the sky, and people got together for dances, and we have our wakes and so forth, which are great. But there is too much mourning and there's too much dancing. And it's time that we even stop dancing and talk and let out our plans or feelings of where we're going to turn to confront these monsters. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. There isn't even time to gather them together. Togetherness is disrupted by so many diversions, the entertainment, the hi-fi, again, the TV and so forth. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Hold close the people you love and embrace them, and reject people who are not interested in your society. Throw them out, whether they're your brother, your relatives, not your parents. Only go forward. If people stand still, leave them. Some people will tread water all their lives. They never want to get to the other end. They just want to stay in the middle and their arms and legs go. Pass them up if you want to get to the other side, if you want to know the truth. A time to seek and a time to lose. We're all losers, and we're losing too much. We've lost Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and Otis Redding and Jim Croce, and the list goes on, and Elvis Presley and John Lennon, and more to follow, as well as the politicians. A time to keep and a time to cast away. Keep your memories and cast away your false notions, your false heroes, your false leaders. Think for yourself. Don't let those phony Jerry Rubins pop up again, or those Abby Hoffmans. Think alone. A time to rend and a time to sow, and a time to keep silence and a time to speak. I kept silent all through my young adulthood and up through the 50s. I kept silent when Richard Nixon was framing Alger Hiss, and when the Rosenbergs were prosecuted and given the electric chair, and through the Cold War and the Hollywood Red Scare and the House Un-American Activity. When John Kennedy was killed, I spoke up. Someday you will find a moment where you will not want to be silent anymore, and then speak, and if necessary, yell. A time to love and a time to hate. Define who you love and stay with people that want social progress and clean air and free the oceans of pollution, and against the mob putting radioactivity into the waste sites and living with radiation and germs and diseases and poverty and scaring old people out of their savings and increased health plans. Love people that are pro-life, and feel free to hate people that are digging your grave. And a time for war and a time for peace. It's going into 1981. We have to distinguish who we're going to make war with and who we're going to have peace with. And I really hope for you that you have a happy New Year, and that we work for peace, and that we work for it together, and know who our common enemy are, the destroyers of life, and work for positive things with people working for positive things, and stay away from the others, because there isn't that much time to spread your time. Use your hours fruitfully, thoughtfully, and fight hard to survive. It won't be easy, but it'll be worth the struggle. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. Have a good year.
This has been World Watchers International with noted conspiracy investigator Mae Brussell. This program originates from Carmel, California.